wondering if, you know, well, I was just wondering your stories more or less about the German families coming into Indianola. And do you know what happened to those families, or where did the people go after Indianola was essentially destroyed?
Okay. Well, first of all, the people, I started this book in 1853. The first wave of German immigrants arrived in December of 1844. And when they arrived on that coast, there was one house. That's it. And there was a group of noblemen in Germany who had organized this process of moving all these Germans to Texas. The idea was to get rid of the peasant farmers who had not enough land to farm, the second sons who were wealthy and in the way and causing trouble, the crafters who no longer were able to make their crafts because of the Industrial Revolution. Machinery was taking over for them. And so and then the intellectuals. None of them wanted to fight in the wars, and they were being drafted. So they had people willing to come, and they began to sell to the families for $240 a trip to Texas. They bought land out beyond the Pedernales River. It was, I believe, 4 million acres. They paid $9,000 for it, and it wasn't worth using. They had a man named Prince Karl of Solms-Braunfels, who was the leader. And he arrived before the first wave of Germans and discovered that that land was, the soil was too shallow for farming. It was too far from Austin and San Antonio for them to get supplies. And it was also in Comanche territory. So it was useless. So he suddenly it was necessary for him to find a place for them to land and a place to take them. And so he ended up coming into Matagorda Bay, which is pretty much on the central Texas coast. And he met the man who owned that property. It was one fellow, his last name was White. And they agreed that the Germans could land there. They had no idea that the German noblemen would continue to send ship after ship of those people to Texas. And they even sent word, stop, we can't take care of them. But by the end of December, there were 4 shiploads there. And Prince Karl finally was able to get wagons and start taking them inland. It was the 21st of March, a Good Friday, before they reached what became New Braunfels. And he bought that land 1 week before they arrived. So, with all that going on in the Verein, the German noblemen continuing to send shipload after shipload, even after this group, those Germans, so many of them became so disgusted that they were no longer going to follow or trust the Verein. So they began to stay. Some of them walked and stopped in other places, but many of them stayed right there on that coast, and they began to buy property. And they began to, they built some docks out into the water. And then by 1849, a man named Charles Morgan, who was a big shipper all over the East Coast and all over the Gulf of Mexico, moved his shipping point down close to that little village that they had started and built a pier way out into the shallow water so his big ships could start coming in. And that was the thing that made the town really grow. I mean, the immigrants were coming, but having shipping made all the difference. And this was right after the Mexican War. And so the United States government began to send troops in through that port to go out on the western edge of Texas and protect all the western settlements from Indian attack. They even went as far as El Paso, and Fort Bliss developed after they put a fort, but it wasn't called Bliss for I don't know how long. But anyway, they came in through there. Also, the silver in northern Mexico, in those huge mines around Chihuahua, needed a place that was closer to the docks to get to the water, to get to New Orleans for the mint. So they began to bring Mexican carts in loaded with silver from the northern Mexican mines, and they put them on ships, took them to New Orleans, took the silver to New Orleans to the mint. It was the site where the camels came in 1856. During the Mexican War, Jeff Davis had heard that camels were wonderful beasts of burden. And when he became Secretary of War, he was able to convince Congress to allocate $30,000 for an experiment to bring camels in. They came in through the port at Indianola. So you see, it was growing and growing and growing from all kinds of things besides just the German immigrants. And I wanted to wait to write about it until 1853, because by that time the town was really developing. And it developed to the point, by the Civil War, it rivaled Galveston as far as a port. Now, it didn't have as large a population. When it had the first storm in 1875, the population was a little over 3,000. But I wrote about the build-up to the Civil War and the problems that these Germans had. Most of them did not have slaves. They didn't believe in slavery. They didn't want to secede from the Union because, after all, they didn't believe in slavery. They didn't believe in fighting for it. And then many of them felt like the United States had welcomed them. Texas had just joined the Union as they came. And so they didn't want to fight against the country that had welcomed them. So it was a serious problem, and yet many of them decided, since they lived in the land and they were part of the land and it was their new home, that they would fight for the Confederacy. All right, I guess I've told you a lot more than you wanted to know. Anybody else have an argument or a question?
She knows.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.